Ms. Archana Kapoor, Director, the TRF, Mr. Siddharth B. Shrestha, Chief of SPCC UNICEF, who will be giving our inaugural address, Dr. B. Sardach from SEMCA, who will be speaking on SDGs and climate change, Ms. Kanti Singh, who is the Deputy Country Executive UN Women, who will be speaking on climate change through a gendered perspective. And our special keynote address will be by Ms. R. Jaya, who is the AS, Ministry of Tribal Affairs. Can we have a huge round of applause for our panelists, please?
A very good afternoon to everyone. I am very privileged to have with me on stage. I will introduce one by one. We have Mr. Siddharth Shrestha, who's known to everyone. He is the chief SBCC with UNICEF. Thank you, Siddharth. And today's event, the partner for today's event is UNICEF, as all of you know. We've been talking about it since yesterday. I have with me Dr. B. Shadrach, who's, I hope I've pronounced it correctly, who's the director, SEMCA. We all know that community radios have a very, very long relationship with SEMCA. SEMCA हमारा बहुत पुराना पार्टनर रहा है कम्युनिटी रेडियोज़ में, चाहे वो पीयर रिव्यू हो, चाहे वो कम्युनिटी बेस्ड लर्निंग हो, चाहे डिज़ास्टर पे काम हो. So, SEMCA has been a very old partner. UNICEF, of course, has been one of our oldest partners who has believed always in the power of community radio. I am very happy to have with us on stage a very old friend and now the Deputy Country Representative of UN Women, Ms. Kanta Singh, who's here, Mr. Sunil, ADG Global and Prasar Bharati, and he has many, many more responsibilities in Prasar Bharati. He's no less busy than, I think, the G20 team right now. He's traveling every day. Whenever I call him, I'm in Sikkim, I'm in Srinagar. His flight got cancelled day before. Yesterday he came in, he was called by the minister. He came in right up to the door and he had to leave without addressing us. So thank you, sir, for making time. You've left the standing committee, or you've just come from the standing committee and you've joined us for this. Our relationship with Prasar Bharati has grown because of you, and we are certainly very, very grateful to you. And last but not least, on stage is a face that all old radio stations know. I would like you to give a big hand to the panelists and to Ms. R. Jaya, former Joint Secretary, Ministry of INB. I think इन्हीं के टाइम में नहीं, इनके जाने के बाद एक और सम्मेलन हुआ था. मैडम के टाइम हम लोग सब सम्मेलन में मिलते थे, रेडियो सम्मेलन में मिलते थे. I've had the privilege of working very closely with ma'am. She is now Additional Secretary, Tribal Affairs, is very, very passionate about community radios. Always, whenever we talk, which is few and far between, but whenever we do talk, she keeps asking me, कैसे हैं सब लोग, कैसे हैं, कैसा चल रहा है community radio का sector. I would also take this occasion to acknowledge the presence of Madam Anju Nigam here. Ma'am, I would request you to at least say hi to all the radio stations. We all know her. She has also been Joint Secretary MIB, and Esther Ka, who was DG DAVP, and with whom we have all worked. So I feel very, very privileged and very honored to have this esteemed audience, this esteemed gathering, and such a lovely panel on stage. Just setting the tone of Siddharth is a tough taskmaster. Before he even signs a contract with us, what is going to be the outcome? Is it going to be a one-off event? I think we all have a commitment to climate change. Since morning we've been discussing it. So all of us are committed to working on climate change. And that is why today, as part of the Radio Festival, this whole day of February 14th is devoted to climate change. Since the morning, we've had fantastic sessions, Siddharth. We began with the first session, 4 community radios coming together from different parts who've also worked with UNICEF in the project on climate change, Climate Countdown, sharing their stories and the work they've done. Then we had Mr. Shyam Saran, former Foreign Secretary, in conversation with an environment journalist. I think everyone felt so enriched after that session because the way he brought it down to what we need to do and what are the reasons for climate change and how it is a global problem. And as we all keep saying, it's local solutions, it's adaptation and resilience that we have to focus upon, because at least climate change is here for good. All we can do is adapt to those changes. And then we had a session with some RJs from very vulnerable zones like Kashmir, people doing different things. We had a panel of community radios and private FM radios who discussed how they handle, how they talk climate change. And last but not least, we talked about some noise, which is good. And we had RJ Sarthak from Radio 1, which is an Hindustan Times channel, in conversation with Nasir, who runs now a DPS radio in Srinagar, and they talked about what is the noise that we need to make on radio. So I wanted all the panelists to know a little about what we've been doing here since morning. Yesterday was, of course, World Radio Day. Our theme was Radio for Peace. Today it is Radio for Climate Action. I'm not going to make a very long speech, but I just want to highlight a few things, and we have worked very closely with UNICEF on climate change, and we intend to take this project to a number of other radio stations in a number of other vulnerable zones. We all know that people living in rural areas, vulnerable areas, and poverty in areas which are poor and are the ones who are least responsible for the gas emissions. We talked about it this morning, but bear the brunt of climate change the most. Climate change is eroding and reversing development gains. We talked about the huge highways and everything which are coming up, and exacerbating gender inequality, social and economic injustices, and conflict across the world. In 2021, CEW undertook a district-wise climate vulnerability assessment of India. And during the assessment, they found that more than 75% of Indian districts, which are home to about 638 million Indians, are extreme climate event hotspots. Climate risk cannot be reduced to zero. We heard Mr. Shyam Saran talk extensively about it, but climate action, adaptation, and climate resilient development is the need of the hour. And I think we are all committed to that, and we are all working towards that. The World Bank report 2020 report, the World Bank's 2020 report talked about the adaptation principles, and they laid out 6 key principles. One of the central principles emphasized on building capacity of people. According to the report, citizens need to be informed on the climate risks, potential new opportunities, and their roles and responsibilities, especially through reliable information dissemination, accountable information dissemination, supporting innovation, and access to best technologies. Needless to say that there is a strong link between community communication and human development. And radio is a very powerful tool due to its all-pervasiveness, ease of operation, and its inherent ability to overcome literacy barriers. I don't think after these 2 days I need to elaborate a little more on that. हम सब ने इसके बारे में बात करी है. 2 दिन से हम लोग यही चर्चा कर रहे हैं. Using a ground-up approach helps to make use of existing wisdom as well as build awareness among communities which the internet cannot penetrate, and on issues that mainstream media cannot even start to contextualize. Community radios play an important role in democratization of information and awareness raising. We all know it is a hyper-local medium. I don't need to talk to those converted, but I only need to emphasize that when we work with communities, we involve them, and we work with their participation. Under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister, the Indian presidency of G20 has announced the vision of one earth, one family, one future, Vasudhaiva Kudumbakam. I said it yesterday, I repeat it today. We feel very, very privileged that this event is being hosted in collaboration with G20. G20 implies a world of hope, tolerance, and social justice, where poverty has been overcome and people are living in dignity and security. And that is the meaning of Vasudeva Kutumbakam. The Radio Festival is, of course, very proud to not only work with G20 Secretariat, but with the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting, with UNICEF, with UNESCO, and with SEMCA, to make a difference, to take back home some of the learnings of this festival and then disseminate information amongst the people in a more responsible and accountable way. The idea of this whole day workshop is to build on the best practices which we have been learning about since morning, to learn and be better informed, and to look at the intersectionalities of climate change. Our whole idea was to get experts like we have on the dais today with us. And as I told you, the next session is also going to discuss the vulnerabilities and the intersections of climate change from different perspectives. Our job is to consolidate these learnings, learn from the past, learn from the present, and ensure a better future. So thank you once again for being here, and thank you once again to all the audience that is here. Thank you so much. I now request Siddharth to please come and give the inaugural address.
It's great to be standing here today again. I think exactly a year ago when we had the radio festival. So let me just get with the formalities. Good afternoon, Madam R. Jaya, Additional Secretary, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Sunil Ji, our old friend, ADG Global and Prasar Bharati, Ms. Kanta Singh, Deputy Rep, UN Women, Dr. Shadrach, Director of SEMCA. Ladies and gentlemen, youths, partners, colleagues from the media and radio stations. A lot of it has already been mentioned by Archana. I was thinking it's similar to what I have here. But I'm going to focus, as UNICEF works on children, I'm going to focus more on the impacts of climate change on children. We do know that, I think from yesterday you all have been here, and you've been hearing one of the biggest threats is climate change, we need to do climate action. So that's something which I don't need to repeat. It's not only in India, but it's also a global challenge. So we've also been talking, what I hear from my colleague Shalini, who's been leading on this from UNICEF, that it is not just talking about climate change, but also our collective responsibility in the room and elsewhere to take action, whatever we can within our limits, to mitigate its efforts and to create a sustainable future for ourselves, but mainly for the future generation. I was not there for the morning session as well as yesterday, but I did hear that there has been a lot of discussions, a lot of good ideas. Archana mentioned about best practices. Definitely this is something which we are hoping that it just doesn't stay in this room. I'm not a tough taskmaster like what Archana says, but it's about not just having events, right? I think there needs to be something which needs to be coming out of this room, an action while you go back to your respective radio stations, respective media houses, in our offices, even in my office. We have a collective, that's the definition of collective responsibility for us. Looking at the impacts of climate change, particularly for children, in India, according to the German Watch methodology, India ranks as the 7th country most affected by the climate crisis, particularly for children. The other data we have is the climate. There was recently a children's climate risk index, which reveals that globally 1 billion children are at extremely high risk of the impacts of climate change. That is nearly half of all children in the world. And where does India rank? India actually ranks currently, it keeps on changing. Every quarter they do this risk index. Currently it ranks as 26th most at risk for children out of the 163 countries assessed. So we are on the higher quintile. So without this risk mitigations, what happens? It is definitely impacting children's health and also compromising not just their health, but their access to school, healthcare facilities, and safe water and sanitation. That's why, reflecting on what Archana was saying, it needs to be a convergent approach. It's just not one ministry. It's across the board, across the offices, across the community radio stations, and the overall radio stations in general. Now, coming back to children, of course, we all have a role to play, but why do we need to invest in children for climate change? Because evidence shows that investing in children as change agents for environmental protection is a promising model to shape community perceptions and drive actions for climate change. But in order to do that, right, we must equip the future generation, particularly our children and youth, with the tools and enabling environment, not just the tools. They need to become vocal advocates for themselves and their communities. We at UNICEF India have been investing in identifying opportunities through which the children can become change agents. For example, there is a number of initiatives where we are looking at informing and engaging them on CCCS dialogue. We have something called a Yuva platform, which is a conglomerate of youth organizations across India. That's a platform we are using. And also in our state offices, there is a lot of adolescent groups which are being involved in this particular topic. Not just engaging them, but we also need to provide them platforms where they can express their ideas. Not a top-down approach, but more of a bottom-up approach. And in helping them become change agents, that is where the role of radio comes in. And about a month ago or so, I think it was a month ago, when Archana and I, we had a discussion. That is where we thought about, radio for peace is fine. But I think, or we believe, that radio needs to play an even more stronger role in climate change, and that is why we are here today. Because we all know, and we are converts, right? Most of you are involved with radio one way or the other. And I don't have to say that it is an incredibly powerful tool to not only change mindsets, not only generate awareness, but to ensure that the dialogue continues. I think the best example I have experienced myself is during the COVID is still there, by the way. I should not say COVID is gone. During the high peaks of COVID, radio, particularly when we had to follow, wash our hands, and the most difficult thing, the most difficult behavior, you know what it is we had to adhere to, social distancing, right? Social distancing, when you had to do social distancing, that is where the role of radio, particularly community radios, had a big role to play in the COVID response. It is, I think, a round of applause to everybody that you made that happen. And it was, it also came up in our assessments that even though we had to broadcast day in, day out, right, people were getting irritated. For example, if you look at the first peak of COVID, we worked with the Ministry of Health and had that really irritating ringtone. As soon as you pick up the phone, before you pick up the phone, you say, wash your hands, social distance, like every time. It was irritating, but there is a good recall. And that's something which we also used for community radios and radios. And that's why I believe that radio is definitely a very strong medium of communication. It is here to stay, and it is here to make a change. Coming back to looking at some work which has already been done, and Archana has already highlighted. We had looked at some pilot last year where we already had some promising results. For example, 10 community radios operating in climate vulnerable zones of Andhra Pradesh, Assam, Gujarat, Odisha, Maharashtra, and Puducherry were engaged in the youths. And that actually was best practices. And I think, Archana, while we, as a follow-up action, this documentation should definitely be shared with all our participants here so that they can generate ideas on what to do with radio programs, right, on climate change. So I still believe, coming back to the point of why we are here today, this is an excellent platform for not only community radios, but also other channels, private broadcasters, community radio I already mentioned, and other media to discuss the key issues and how we can all work together for climate action. So homework is still there. This is just the classwork. That's what I have to really encourage and urge everybody here in this room. We would also like to hear your ideas. I know there is less opportunity for having a group discussion or so, but we would like to hear your ideas, even though it does not come today. Please share your ideas with Archana and team on proposed actions. So for example, I'm sure you're already doing it. You could host debates and discussions about climate change, provide a platform for experts to share their knowledge and for listeners to ask questions and learn more about the topic. Whenever I go to the field, not in all instances, but whenever I go to the field, I try and ask not only the usual questions of, is there access to water and sanitation? Have you washed your hands today to the children, right? Because this is part of our job. I also try to bring in some questions around climate change. Do you know about climate change, particularly in the villages? And most of the times, the answer is no idea. No idea. And when you say no idea, I think we would again encourage everybody in the room here to say that, yes, I have an idea. Yes, what does, for rural communities, we talk about fancy words like carbon emission, reducing carbon footprint. What is that for them? We do need to break that up, right? And that is where the radio stations can play a very, very important and significant role. You can also highlight the work of local organizations. There are a number of local organizations, I'm sure, not in all the places, who are doing some work around climate action and climate change, who are making efforts to reduce the carbon footprint. Bring them on, get them into their programs, and that itself is something which you could do for no cost, I would say, if they are around the community. And finally, lead by example, because we always say charity begins at home. But if you have a community radio station or a radio station in your community and you're using all plastics across, for instance, plastic across the radio station, you are not a good role model, right? You need to be a role model so that the communities can learn from you. So please do simple things by reducing your carbon footprint. And let me end by saying that little actions can make a huge difference. And that is why all of us here today have a very, very important role to play in climate change. Dhanyavad.
Thank you, Mr. Shresht. I would like to invite Dr. B. Sadrak, Director SEMCA, to please address the crowd.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Ms. Archana Kapoor, Ms. Jaya, the Assistant Additional Secretary, Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Ms. Kanta Singh from the UN Women, Mr. Shrestha from UNICEF, and Mr. Sunil from Prasar Bharati. And all my colleagues here, and I can see Nisha Narayan after a long time. Good to see you, Nisha. And Ms. Anju Nigam, Ms. Esther, and my own colleague, Ms. Monica Sharma. Thank you for this opportunity. And at SEMCA, probably you know more about SEMCA than me. I've joined SEMCA about 8 months ago, And I hear that many of you mentioning SEMCA, having been associated with this organization over a decade or so. So I don't have to introduce the organization, but briefly, we work in promoting open distance, technology-enabled and media-enabled learning amongst community members. That's our mainstay. So the rationale for us to be a part of this festival and to be part of the smart community, smart, isn't it? Smart community is to take the message across to the masses, and the best method that we see as radio as means to be doing that. And a community of 400 and odd community radio stations here working together, but also working closely with not only their own community, but the community that governs them is something very powerful. And we see the climate action, climate literacy, climate education as something possible through audio communication. And earlier I was talking to Ms. Esther, and she was mentioning that storytelling is a powerful way to connect with the audience. And if you are able to tell stories well, the audience can connect with you, even if it is not a visual medium. You can overcome the challenge of connecting with people. And that's something that is very powerful, isn't it? When it comes to communicating about climate change or educating the community around the actions that they need to undertake, we need to use this means of storytelling and that methodology of connecting with people in a manner that it touches them. And that's the challenge. That's where I think the community radios can make a huge difference. Prior to joining SEMCA, I was in Metro Vancouver in Canada, and the government of Metro Vancouver has come up with what they call the self-learning modules on climate action for the community members. So many of the citizens of Metro Vancouver are encouraged to understand the basics of climate change and climate literacy, what they call, and understanding climate systems and the effects of climate change and the impact it has on the humanity, but more so on the citizens of Metro Vancouver itself. And the course is very, very interesting, that it's so practical. It enables you to understand the climate change phenomenon from a local context. If somebody says there is a 2% increase in climate, it doesn't really resonate, or sea level rise, it doesn't resonate. But when you localize it and tell stories and make it easier for people to understand in their settings and their context, it becomes very imminent. And the entire Vancouver community comes around and supports the cause of climate change globally, not only in Canada or in British Columbia, but also at a global level. Because the course enables them to explore climate action as a community within their neighborhood, within their setting, and how they could make a difference to the place that they live in. So that's important. And I think when it comes to community radios or any method of communicating with people, we need to localize, we need to contextualize, but also use very interesting methods of communicating to people. Now, what could happen when it comes to climate literacy or climate education at a local level? There could be civic action, isn't it? When our objective of climate education or climate literacy at the local level should be to trigger some civic action. But not only that, if you think hard and if you really program it well, you could create green jobs. You can create a green consumer market, which your own community can meet up. When you turn the consumer market into a green consumer market, and you also create local action, that could create green jobs and green products and green services, you also create employment opportunities and entrepreneurship opportunities for the community where you serve. And collectively, once you do this, instead of government coming to you to interact with you, as a community, you can go to the government and interact and ask for your dues, ask for what you want the governments to do for you. So with this in mind, with SMART and with Ms. Archana Kapoor, we are developing a course, an audio-based course which the community broadcasters can use to educate on climate change to the community at the community level. We have a number of courses for school children, for at the tertiary education level. There are a number of initiatives, educational initiatives aimed at the active learning population. But when it comes to the community, there is no program as we speak now available in a systematic manner that we could promote through radio or audio means. So this course that we are kickstarting tomorrow is a small contribution to the climate change action that collectively we need to undertake. And this is going to be around the concept of how community broadcasters can communicate on climate change to the community and trigger civic action and enable the community to come up with green opportunities which they can bring to the notice of the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. I would also like to call on stage Ms. Kanta Singh, Deputy Country Representative, UN Women, to please address everybody present here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Sabhi ko namaskar. Jaya ma'am, Sunil sir, Sadrak, and my colleague from UN, UNICEF, Siddharth, and Archana said old friend. We are not old, we just look old. But yes, I know Archana for a long time. Sabhi ko Valentine's Day की भी शुभकामनाएं. और आप सब लोगों ने रोमांस करना शायद सिखाया. पहली जो रोमांस की हम छोटे जब बच्चे थे तो रोमांस की पहले शब्द अच्छे गाने वो सब रेडियो से ही तो आया करते थे, राइट? सो यू हैव अ ग्रेट रोल इन स्प्रेडिंग लव, रोमांस, गुड विशेस एंड हैप्पीनेस अराउंड द वर्ल्ड. सो बधाई हो सबके लिए जो आपने किया और आप जो करने वाले हैं. वो बोलते हैं ना कि अब क्या गज़ल सुनाऊं तुझे देखने के बाद. इतना कुछ कहा गया है अब तक. उसमें मैं थोड़ा सा जो सिद्धार्थ ने कहा बच्चों की बात, मैं सिर्फ उसको बच्चों को विमेन से सिर्फ रिप्लेस करूँगी. नया कहने को कुछ भी नहीं है मेरे पास. इशू है क्लाइमेट चेंज का, इशू है हम सब की भागीदारी का, एंड ऑल्सो हाउ climate change is impacting women or the differential impact of climate change on women. हम सबको ये, और आप लोग क्योंकि ये रोज़ाना काम करते हैं, मुझे नहीं लगता कि समझाने की ये ज़रूरत है या बात करने की ज़रूरत है. मैं सिर्फ थोड़ा सा 2-3 बातों के बारे में आपसे बात करना चाहूँगी कि क्लाइमेट चेंज और डिज़ास्टर, अगर आप 2 चीज़ों को ही देख लीजिए जो प्रकृति से संबंध है जिनका, दोनों का ही असर अलग अलग होता है क्योंकि दोनों की नेचर अलग अलग है. अभी अभी टर्की में आपने देखा होगा जो क्लाइमेट चेंज का, एनवायरमेंटल डिग्रेडेशन का जो फ़र्क हुआ टर्की में, उसका रिज़ल्ट महिलाओं पे कैसे पड़ा. मैं अभी एक बहुत ही मूविंग स्टोरी पढ़ रही थी. वो पता नहीं टर्की की है कि लोग बहुत इन दिनों पिछली किसी पुरानी स्टोरी को लेके आ जाते हैं व्हाट्सएप पे. लेकिन उसमें ये था कि एक महिला जो है, आप इम्पैक्ट तो देखिए क्योंकि पुरुष ज़्यादातर घर से बाहर रहते हैं, महिला घर में है, अर्थक्वेक हुआ, उनका असर उस पर हुआ. लेकिन एक माँ बच्चे को कवर करके खुद डेड थी लेकिन बच्चा नीचे अलाइव था. ऐसी एक छोटी सिस्टर, एक लड़की ने भी अपने भाई को बचाया. उस तरह की बहुत सारी स्टोरीज डिजास्टर के पार्ट मूव करती हैं. लेकिन उस पे माँ ने जो लास्ट मैसेज छोड़ा होगा कि ये बच्चे के लिए कि इफ़ यू सर्वाइव आई जस्ट वांट टू टेल यू दैट आई लव यू. So starting from how environment or the climate change impacts women, how women perceive climate change and disaster. So those are the two things I wanted you to understand and which I'm going to focus on. होता क्यों है ये सब? क्या हो रहा है दुनिया में? Why is everybody talking about climate change now, starting from world leaders to the big money that is being put into environment, now restoration, I would say, not or to stop degradation. There's huge focus in past 2 decades now. तो बात सीधी सी ये है कि पहले बर्बाद कीजिए, फिर उसको ठीक करने की कोशिश कीजिए. Western countries particularly are guilty of doing that, जबकि अफेक्ट हम सब पे होता है. अर्चना ने एक बात कही कि जो ग्रामीण क्षेत्र में जो लोग रहते हैं हमारे, जिनसे हमारा सरोकार रहता है रोज़ाना, उनका कोई इसमें ख़ास नेगेटिव भागीदारी नहीं है. लेकिन क्योंकि सारी दुनिया में असर हो रहा है, क्योंकि बारिशों में, अर्थक्वेक्स में, क्योंकि जो ज़मीन बंजर होई जा रही है, उसका असर किस पे होता है? जो सबसे गरीब हैं. ये कितनी अनफेयर बात है. और उनको पता तक नहीं है कि कौन क्या किए जा रहा है जो उनकी ज़िंदगी को तबाह किए जा रहा है. एक बहुत ही जाति वाली बात है. सबसे पहले तो गरीबों में भी सबसे गरीब कौन है? विमेन. क्योंकि उन तक जानकारी तक नहीं पहुंचती है, उनके पास कलेक्टिवाइज करने का नहीं है, उनकी डिसीजन मेकिंग में कोई भागीदारी नहीं है. जो अनप्लान्ड जो डेवलपमेंट हो रहा है या विकास हो रहा है, ये किस तरह से एनवायरनमेंट को बर्बाद किए जा रहा है, उसमें महिलाओं को जो खासकर गरीब महिलाएं हैं, उनका तो कोई योगदान है ही नहीं, बिल्कुल भी. जो आदमी गरीब एक झोपड़ी में रहता है और अपने आसपास के पेड़ों को पानी देता रहता है, उसने क्या किया है कि उसको ये भुगतना पड़े कि बाढ़ आ जाए अचानक? कैसे होगा वो सब? क्योंकि ह्यूमन ग्रीड की कोई लिमिट नहीं रही है. गांधी जी कहते थे कि सबकी ज़रूरतों के लिए तो बहुत कुछ है, लेकिन सबकी ग्रीड पूरा करने के लिए शायद दुनिया में कुछ नहीं पूरा. दुनिया का ये सब जितना भी हमारे पास नेचुरल वेल्थ है वो पूरी नहीं पड़ेगी. वही हो रहा है कि मुझे एक घर नहीं चाहिए, मुझे 5 घर चाहिए. मुझे एक फैक्ट्री नहीं, मुझे 50 फैक्ट्री खोलनी है. मुझे माइंस का किंग बनना है. मुझे पैसा कमाना है. कितना? देयर हैज़ टू बी सम लिमिट टू दैट. बट ह्यूमन माइंड्स वर्क लाइक दैट कि मुझे तो राजा बनना है, मुझे तो यहाँ सबसे बड़ा बनना है इस दुनिया में, और उसके लिए किसी भी तरह का भी नुकसान हो वो उसका मुझे कोई परवाह नहीं है. मेरा परिवार ठीक है बस. इसके बारे में हो क्या रहा है? हो ये रहा है कि अभी सरकारें मिलती हैं, बैठती हैं, बात करती हैं, बहुत सारा पैसा. इस बार अगर आप इंडिया का बजट, लेटेस्ट बजट जो आया है, जो आई वुड टेल यू मोर अबाउट दैट, 35,000 करोड़ हैव बीन, जो आउटले है वो 35,000 करोड़ का है एनवायरनमेंट को ठीक करने के लिए. मिनिस्ट्री में है, मिनिस्ट्री एक प्रॉपर मिनिस्ट्री है एनवायरनमेंट पे जो काम करती है. सो देयर इज़ अ लॉट दैट्स हैपनिंग. इन्वेस्टमेंट होती है इस पे, इस तरह के काम के साथ, जहाँ पे अब सोलर एनर्जी को प्रमोट किया जा रहा है. सोलर जो सन था वो तो पहले भी था हमारे पास, और जो आदमी, हम जिन लोगों के साथ काम करते हैं, उनको तो सूर्य एक बहुत बड़ा उनके लिए एनर्जी सेवर रहा है. They have been using sun to save lives. लेकिन यहाँ सिर्फ लाइव्स की बात नहीं है, ये लाइवलीहुड्स की भी बात है. यहाँ रोज़ाना के बच्चों की पढ़ाई की बात है, यहाँ पे लाइव स्टॉक की बात है. बिकॉज एनवायरनमेंट इम्पैक्ट्स एवरीथिंग एल्स. विमेन के साथ इसका सबसे बड़ा असर क्या होता है? क्योंकि विमेन आर द कस्टोडियंस ऑफ इंडिजिनस नॉलेज ऑन एनवायरनमेंट. अनफॉर्चुनेटली दे आर नॉट सिटिंग ऑन द डिसीजन मेकिंग टेबल्स. जहाँ ये पूछा जाए उनसे कि आप क्या जानते हैं, इसको हम कैसे ठीक कर सकते हैं, दे आर नॉट सिटिंग दैट. वीमेन आर आउट ऑफ डिसीजन मेकिंग रोल्स, particularly on environment. In fact, very recently, the COP27 अभी जो हुआ था इजिप्ट में, उसमें पहली बार जिस स्तर पे महिलाओं ने अपने आप जाके इकट्ठा होके वहाँ बात करना शुरू किया. हमें एक 13 साल की लड़की चाहिए जो इस बारे में बात करेगी और वर्ल्ड लीडर्स का ध्यान अपनी तरफ आकर्षित करेगी कि हमारे बच्चों के बारे में भी सोचिए, आप हमारे बारे में सोचिए, हमारा क्या होगा, आप जो दुनिया को नुकसान किए जा रहे हैं उसमें हमारा क्या होगा. आर यू इवन थिंकिंग अबाउट अस? उसी तरह से विमेन ने भी इस बार काफ़ी सारा, दे क्रिएटेड नॉइस अबाउट दिस, एंड दे ऑल्सो डिमांडेड अकाउंटेबिलिटी. दे डिमांडेड more money to be invested in three things. One is create awareness amongst women and the marginalized communities about the impact of environmental degradation on their lives, because that has not been happening so far. Second thing that they wanted is more investment for doing precisely that, awareness and building skills, giving livelihoods or alternate livelihoods, also employment. जितने भी ग्रीन इकोनॉमी के क्षेत्र हैं या एरियाज़ हैं, उनमें महिलाओं को किस तरह से काम मिले, किस तरह से उनकी हिस्सेदारी हो, उसके बारे में उन्होंने शोर किया. और तीसरा कोलैबोरेशन, बिकॉज इतने बड़े स्तर पे नुकसान हो चुका है अभी तक दुनिया में, तो अगर उसको पहली बात तो अभी उस पर स्टॉप किया जाए, दूसरी बात सब लोग जो काम कर रहे हैं अलग अलग तरीके से, उसमें कैसे हम साथ मिल के काम करें. इस पे बहुत चर्चाएं हुई, इस पे बहुत फोकस किया गया और सरकारों का ध्यान आकर्षित किया गया. आई एम होपिंग दैट COP28 probably will have more organized efforts, particularly from marginalized communities, that will start looking at the impact of climate change and environmental degradation on different different people in the society, not treat them the same way. आखिरी बात जो मैं कहना चाहूँगी वो है कि हम क्या कर सकते हैं. सिंस वी आर सिटिंग हियर ऑल ऑफ अस, रेडियो जो है एक बहुत बड़ा जरिया है लोगों तक पहुंचने का. मुझे इसके बारे में आपको बताने की ज़रूरत नहीं, आप लोग मुझे बता सकते हैं इसके बारे में. खासकर वो लोग जिनके पास समय नहीं है टीवी देखने का, या जिसके पास संसाधन नहीं है, या जो सोलर पावर यूज़ करते हैं सिर्फ घर में लाइट करने के लिए या बच्चे को पढ़ाने के लिए, जिनके पास संसाधन नहीं है, उन तक पहुँचने के आप सबसे बड़े जरिया हैं. तो लोगों को जानकारी पहुंचाने का काम आप कर सकते हैं. दूसरा है कि एजुकेशन, ट्रेनिंग, इस तरह की जो चीज़ें हैं, जो एक्सपर्ट्स जो यहाँ बैठे हैं, इन जैसे लोगों को भी रेडियो पे बुला के बातचीत करवाई जा सकती है. आई हैव स्पोकन ऑन अर्चनाज रेडियो कपल ऑफ टाइम्स ड्यूरिंग कोविड, बिफोर कोविड. सो मुद्दे कुछ भी हो सकते हैं, लेकिन आपके पास जरिया है. हम सब मिलके, और आप तो बहुत बड़ा फेस्टिवल करते हैं, यू आर वर्किंग इन डिफरेंट पार्ट्स ऑफ द कंट्री, probably you can have a awareness month on climate change and role of women in that. Demand accountability. अब सरकार यहाँ बैठी हैं तो मैं बोल सकती हूँ. अब वो है ना मैम कि आपसे ही मोहब्बत है, आपसे ही शिकायत है, और कहाँ जाए. तो वैसे गिला नहीं है कोई आपसे. तो सरकार से अकाउंटेबिलिटी डिमांड करने का टाइम है. व्हेन ऑल ऑफ अस वर्क टुगेदर, वी आल्सो थिंक अलाइक समटाइम्स. वी आल्सो can come together and ask governments to what is happening, what are they doing, and how we can all come together and work with the government. Government भी ideas के लिए मुझे लगता है कई बार ideas की कमी पड़ जाती है. That's where you who have their eyes and ears on ground can probably support the government with great ideas. That was another thing. फिर आप प्रोग्राम चला सकते हैं ग्राउंड पे. That's another thing that I wanted to bring. कि हम लोग ये ना समझें कि मेरा क्या इसमें भूमिका हो सकती है, मैं क्या कर सकती हूँ, मैं तो अकेला हूँ, मैं तो अकेली हूँ, मेरे पास छोटा सा रेडियो है, बस मेरे पास और क्या ताकत है. लेकिन आपके पास वो तो ताकत है जो बहुतों के पास नहीं होती है, क्योंकि आपके पास लोगों के साथ जुड़े रहने की ताकत, आप समझते हैं उनका दर्द, और जिसको दर्द होता है ना, वो दुनिया बदलने की क्षमता रखता है. ये मैं आपको दावे के साथ कह सकती हूँ कि मुझे बहुत दर्द होता है जब महिलाओं को तकलीफ़ होती है तो. और मुझे ये भी लगता है कि हम एज UN women we are doing a lot to train women, to skill them, to make them employable, to also start enterprises using solar power in different parts of the country, because दर्द है हमें. तो जिसको दर्द है वो उसके लिए कुछ इलाज भी ढूंढेगा, एंड दैट वो इलाज सब आपके पास है. इसी आशा के साथ कि हम सब मिलके फिर से काम करेंगे. मैं धन्यवाद देना चाहती हूँ आप सबको, और थैंक यू अर्चना फॉर ब्रिंगिंग मी हियर.
Thank you, Ms. Singh, for that wonderful and inspiring speech. I would like to call on stage Mr. Sunil, ADG Prasar Bharti, to address everybody present here. Thank you, sir.
Coming here and listening to the dais, I feel more educated today than what actually I am or I was before. So thank you for enlightening. And Director and Founder TRF is Archana Kapoor, Madam Jaya, the Additional Secretary Tribal, esteemed audience here, and down also I can find Anju Nigamji is here, Ms. Kari is here, and Mr. Rajiv Shukla is there. So all visionaries and illuminaries of Ministry of Information and Broadcasting and All India Radio, who know a lot and who are visionaries in the subject. A very good afternoon to all of you. At the outset, I would like to quote E.B. White, who wrote in 1933, "I live in strictly rural community, and the people here speak of the radio in a large sense with an over meaning. When they say the radio, they don't mean a cabinet, an electrical phenomena, or a man in the studio. They refer to a pervading, somewhat god-like presence which has come into their lives and homes," unquote. So that is the essence how the people have perceived the radio. So they don't conceive it anymore, but yes, it's a voice coming from somewhere which they have that perception and which comes to their risk at times of disaster and all. So radio, the first modern mass media, defined the 20th century as much as an autobiography. It has made our countries all over the world into lands of listeners, entertaining and educating, angering and delighting, and joining every age and class into a common culture. The 30s and 40s, known as the golden age of the broadcasting, had captured the imagination of the millions. All India Radio, since its inception, has played an exemplary role in knitting the whole country into a united whole. Friends, over the years, with the technology evolving and digitalization booming, the one medium that has survived and remained relevant to the digitally connected audience has been the audio communication. So you heard it right. Audio has become the new radio, right from being a source of the information and keeping up with the day-to-day news to now turning into a complete audio entertainment package. Radio is one medium that has played a huge role in the country's communication industry. Coming to the climate part, the world may not be the same since 2015, when nations agreed to the Paris Agreement on climate action under the aegis of the United Nations. Nationally determined contributions are changing after every Paris meetings, also in different parts of the world, to tackle the menace of the rising temperature globally due to the anthropogenic activities leading to the ambitions. We may be debating on the net zero phenomena, as Archana ji just now told, at the equity from the developed nations to the underdeveloped nations, but we are still struggling to create the bridges between the climate actions and the last mile beyond 2030 after the end of the Paris Agreement. We can question ourselves if we are able to create awareness about the changing climate to the remotest areas away from the hustle bustle of the international conferences, small room meetings and all. The role of the broadcasting is important to inform each and every citizen to make him the part of the climate actions. I would like to give an example of the village in Chennai, village Yizu Thanavadi, roughly 320 kilometers south of Chennai in Tamil Nadu, in district Nagapattinam, trying to create the last mile connectivity with the vulnerable communities to build the climate resilience. This was a recent development which going to Chennai, I could just discover that. What preparation should one make for the children before the cyclone strikes? What should one do in case of sudden rise in the sea levels? In case of coastal terrestrial rains, precautions are required to be taken by the fishermen and so on. These are the kind of the conversations which dominate in the 110 square feet room made soundproof by shutting the doors and the windows. Interviews would be recorded on small mobile phones to cover the radius of approximately 20 kilometers, 15 kilometers or so, reaching to 7-8 villages of these disaster-prone areas to the coast of the Tamil Nadu. These voices, transmitted at 90.8 megahertz, are by the community for the community. Kalanjiam Samugvamoli was the first state's community radio station established in 2008 in Chennai by the Madurai-based non-profit Dham, emphasized on the importance of to rehabilitate the communities after the Zoom in 2004, Indian Ocean Tsunami, to contribute to help the disaster preparedness and recovery in the region. India's vulnerability to extreme weather events is on the rise due to climate change. I see in whatever international conferences I go and wherever the climate change is discussed, community radio has been an integral part as one of the agendas in all those international organizations. That speaks the importance of the community radio, because I was there in Indonesia for this climate summit, and in 2004 they were discussing this. In 2004, when the tsunami lashed their 80 kilometer long stretch, and where more than 180 million lakhs of people died, and all the communication systems and everything was shattered in the country. That time, the people with their own resources, some domestic organizations, small organizations, they came up to build a community radio to disseminate the information on such activities to the people. And from that time till date, that community radio is prevalent in Indonesia. So that was one of the glaring examples where we could find the people are giving so much importance to this, and how they are handling and tackling their natural disaster to mitigate their natural disaster or disinformation or misinformation campaign with the community radio. So that was one example. And Lintas Meragi community radio is again one of the such radio stations which has been established by the local contribution of the people, knowing the importance that yes, in the event of disasters, the communications, the television, things can fail. So this is one of the most easy and accessible and medium to the people, where you can just aware them, create awareness, not only on the disasters, but on the climate change as well. In fact, there is a wide gap between the understanding of the people about the climate change and the increase in the frequency of the extreme events. Its impact on the livelihood is direct, and the suffering is higher amongst our poor and highly vulnerable. The importance of the community radio is increasing as the climate-related extreme events and because occurly with vigorous force and frequency. Since India is a country with the diverse language information provided to the communities in their local dialect is easily assimilated, climate-resilient communities is need of the day. Recently, when the Honorable Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, and the United Secretary General launched the Lifestyle for the Environment movement to live the lifestyle that is in tune with our planet and does not harm it. And those who live such lifestyle are the real pro-planet people. It was the initiative of the Indian Prime Minister to distribute LPG cylinders to each household to replace wood fire in the rural kitchen to reduce the carbon dioxide emission and also to save trees. This scheme was very successful, largely due to the creation of the awareness by the local community, radio and broadcasters at large. With these insights and with what we have got from all such conferences, All India Radio, it has been very productive, but just with a view to reduce the carbon emissions and all, we have almost 50,000 acres of land all over the country. And we have aligned with the Solar Energy Alliance to build solar systems there to at least meet our own 70-80 megawatt requirements, and even to contribute to the grid, thus reducing of the solar emissions. How this idea came, because in all those international conferences, this was one of the areas where people were trying to do that, and this is how Ms. Anju Nigam was there in the ministry, and the project was initiated that time on the solar consumption and becoming a self-reliant. I think we have gone far away beyond, and I thank the community radio and the team for this contribution to the country and to the world at large. I conclude with the thought that come what may, there will always be a place for over the radio. Radio leaves no one behind. I, on behalf of Prasar Bharati, once again extend a very warm welcome to all the candidates, to all the dignitaries, and thank you for being here and listening to me. Thank you.
Ms. Jaya will be addressing the panel. She's from the Ministry of Tribal Affairs. Ma'am, if you could please address the crowd. Thank you.
A very good afternoon to all of you, and belated, but my best wishes on World Radio Day. It was yesterday, but my best wishes to all of us on World Radio Day. And Siddharth, Kanta, Shadrach, Sunil, and of course my dear friend Archana, Anju ma'am here, and I don't see Esther around, but Esther and many of the community radio faces that I recognize. Maybe I don't remember your names or your radio stations as well as I should, but I recognize many of your faces here. Thank you for inviting me today. It's great to be associated again with the community radio sector, and I have Archana to thank for that. Some time back, I had read in probably a WhatsApp message or a Facebook message, all of us have become kind of addicts to this. A meme or maybe a conversation. I don't quite recall what it was, but I do recall the contents. And it said, someone was saying that we need to save the earth. Climate change is happening very fast and we need to save the earth. So the other person says, the earth will save itself. It is ourselves we have to save. So climate change will not finish off the face of the earth. The earth will remain. धरती माँ कहीं जाने वाली नहीं है. धरती माँ अपना माँ का ड्यूटी आज भी निभा रही है और वो आगे भी निभाती रहेगी. मगर हम इस माँ को किस हद तक बूढ़ाने में जो है मदद कर रहे हैं, किस हद तक उनको उस तरफ से धकेल रहे हैं कि उनकी मातृत्व जो है हम उसका फ़ायदा नहीं उठा पाएंगे. क्योंकि धरती तो रहेगी. इट हैज़ बीन थ्रू many geological epochs. There have been ice ages, there have been heat waves, there have been disasters, there have been tsunamis, there have been earthquakes, there have been droughts, there have been famines. Who has suffered? The people have suffered, the livestock have suffered, the life has suffered. Earth as a nourisher of life has of course suffered, but Earth as a planet will continue. We cannot finish it off. So today it's very, sometimes it's amusing, sometimes it is very concerning that today we live in what is called a geological age called the Anthropocene. When I heard this word first, I said, I know anthropology, I am a student of sociology, but what is this thing called Anthropocene? I have not heard of this word. Anthropocene is that word which denotes how human activity has become the dominant factor in the world's, in the Earth's geological age. So whatever we do, our activities have now started impacting the way in which the Earth functions and the way in which Earth is. So for that, I must congratulate the organizers, Archana and her team, for having thought of community radio and climate action. I wouldn't call it climate change, but climate action to reverse, to kind of stop the acceleration of, also halt climate change. So it's a very topical subject that you have taken up, and I'm not an expert on it, unlike what, I don't know if I really need to be in that panel of experts, but what I do understand is that climate change has affected all of us in some way or the other. And climate change, the causes of climate change on the one hand, and those who are impacted by climate change, and those who don't cause climate change but who are also impacted, I think they are all different groups. Kanta has already talked a lot about it, of how someone else creates and someone else kind of takes the effect of it, takes the impact of it. And Siddharth in his speech also talked about children, people who are really, not responsible. The lifestyle they lead is a lifestyle we give them. It's not a lifestyle of their own choice. So children are affected, women are affected, the poor are affected, the marginalized are affected, everybody is affected. So climate action and community radio, of course you are all people dealing with communities, you are radio operating with, through and for and by community. So to that extent you are all very well aware of what the power, the reach of the community radio sector is. But having said that, I today am in a field where climate change, we can learn climate action is something that comes natural to the people we deal with in our ministry. The tribal way of life is something I want to actually talk about here, because it's so close to climate action and it is so natural that we have forgotten that that kind of a life was what many of us led some, say 20-25 years back, where your proximity to nature was something that defined you, where your carbon print didn't define you, but you were actually not leaving any carbon prints. You were in that state where your needs were very less and you were able to live within your own means in a manner where you could, kind of very strongly say, I'm actually one of those who had started climate action much before the word became even a word, if I may say so. Even before the phrase came in, we had large communities of people, especially the tribal people, who were, and even till date, are leading a life which is full of what we call climate action. And that is a life that has not been documented enough in terms of its exemplars of climate action. Because this is a large segment of the Indian population which is still in a state where climate action is something that comes, as I said, naturally to them. They don't even need to know what it means. One of the reasons, Siddharth, that the rural population does not know what climate change and climate action are is because they understand that the summer is slightly warmer, the winter is slightly colder, but they are not able to make that link to whatever they are doing because their lifestyles have not changed. But they are able to understand that last year water scarcity was lesser, but today it is probably increasing. They have to move farther away to fetch water. The causes of it they don't know. They are not the cause of it. Many times they are not the cause of it, which is why they are also probably not really aware of those terms that we talk about. So when we talk about awareness, when we talk about understanding what it is, I think one of the things we need to also bring out very strongly is how our communities are already in a state of climate action, if they are in a state of climate action, and how they can be kind of held out to the rest of the world as exemplars. Of course, there is this other side to this kind of a life, which is how much of the fruits of development have reached this segment of our population, which is the most friendly as far as climate action is concerned. So is it always a climate action versus development issue? How do we marry the two? How is it that our tribal populations, the population that I deal with, are actually taking the benefit, or actually kind of, able to benefit from the developmental paradigm that we have adopted in such a manner that they are able to be still in the vanguards of climate action, while at the same time being able to get full benefits of development. And that's something that needs to be kind of debated, to be tested, to be known because that, I think, it would be the path the world needs to look into. Are we looking at a state where life has changed? Let us face it, life has changed. Every one of us today goes by car. We do talk about carpooling, but how many of us really talk about public transport? And when we do talk about public transport, what exactly is it that we are doing in terms of opting for public transport? Or I am guilty of not using public transport. But then what is the cost benefit of using public transport vis-a-vis not using public transport? What exactly is the state of public transport? How exactly is that going to service everybody? So there are a lot of ifs and buts that need to be, kind of plugged into, and it's an integrated, holistic view we need to take of this entire thing, because ultimately what the community radio sector, what the radio sector, what the communication sector, what SEMCA and everyone else involved can do in this, and would probably also be doing in this, is basically to talk about what climate action is, what climate change is, and what can be done about it. But ultimately, we will need to look at what is the supply, what is the demand, what is the policy with reference to all this. In that sense, I will go back again to another ministry which also deals with climate change and, of course, environment and forest. I am talking about the MOEFCC. If you recall, in November 2021 at the COP26, the Honorable Prime Minister had introduced a concept called the lifestyle for environment, what we call the LIFE. So, and that is probably one of those documents. The LIFE document is envisaged to be converted, rather it has become a movement where people are looking at how do my actions impact the environment. So, at the local level, at the individual level, at the community level, how do our actions impact the environment? So there are a list of things that we could do that we may probably want to, kind of avoid doing. So how much of this is coming into our personal lives? How much of this is coming into our ways of thinking? How much of this is coming into the kind of lifestyle we are giving our children? So all these together, at some point of time, much of this would also impact the kind of developmental paradigm that we have taken up, where we are now looking at, Kanta said it, I had wanted to say it, I had wanted to quote Gandhiji and say the earth has enough for everyone's need, but certainly not enough for anyone's greed. Unfortunately, the anyone has kind of become a larger number, and therefore there has been an imbalance. But what is everyone's need? I think at some point of time, our minimum standard of life would need to be defined, because it's not acceptable that we say, okay, since you are climate friendly, since your lifestyle is most suited to, the kind of action that we want, maybe this is the way it has to be preserved. So that kind of a thinking would also probably be counterproductive. And the other kind of thinking where we say that everyone has an AC, everyone has travels by his own car, we keep building infrastructure which caters to a certain kind of lifestyle, I think that also is something that needs to be kind of looked into. What we are really looking at is the Madhya Marg. The Madhya Marg would probably, and we are the proponents of the Madhya Marg, if I may say so. Way back in ancient India, we had the Buddha, the enlightened, tell us about the Madhya Marg. The middle path was what he preached about all the time. And the Madhya Marg is something that we need to look for. And I think community radios here have that role of kind of contextually determining or contextually kind of bringing out what could be the Madhya Marg for those communities, what could be the way forward for those communities, and make certain themes running themes, whether it is, and some of us here are representing those running themes. For instance, women as a running theme, children as a running theme, the marginalized groups as running themes. So how do these running themes and environment as a running theme, how do these kind of intersect? How do these influence and impact each other? How is it that the community can throw out solutions, contextual solutions, no doubt, because think global, act local is something that defines climate action. So how does that thinking global and acting local convert itself into community action because of the impact of community radio? I think community radios there have a very, very crucial seminal role to play, and you are all experts in that. You have all thrown up so many issues while I was dealing with many of your content. I had come across content which was very striking in areas where one would think that thinking couldn't be in that manner. There have been such diversities of thought and diversities of acting that community radio had brought forth. I think that is the strength, that you represent those contextual diversities, and I think climate action would also be your forte in that respect. And I'm sure this group here and all community radios across the country would throw up those solutions on climate action that have been adopted at each of those community levels. And together, I'm sure the life movement would be something that would be woven out of this, and we would, kind of face this crisis together, not only as Indians, but also as people who have been advocating the entire concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, and I think we will be showing the world that we are still leaders in this aspect. So thank you all very much again for this opportunity that you have given me. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I would request the panelists to please inaugurate the climate change curriculum developed by SMART with UNICEF.